This is an Australian story. It's written by Australians who grew up in Australia, but within Asian families. Like Alice Pung, they're multilingual. Some of them were migrants and some of them were refugees. The collection uses a vast array of forms. One theme, one piece of dough, but flick it and then you have multiple strands. In this book, we have comics and memoirs and short stories and poems. What a collection.
I have a great editor from Black Ink, and he asked me if I'd like to edit a book. And we'd collect stories from all Asian Australians, not just from Melbourne, but from all over Australia. And so that's how this book came about. With every book, you have to make decisions based purely structurally, and every single group of stories, I grouped them in these themes. So you'd have battlers, you'd have pioneers, you'd have mateship. There's a chapter called Un-Australian with a question mark. And that was important to me, to show that these are Australian stories. They're not ethnic stories about flowers in the eastern wind or anything. These are growing up Asian in Australia stories. Asian Australians have been here since 1820. They can be battlers, they can be mates, they can be pioneers, just as any other Australian can be.
This collection is more than a bowl of stories. There's a subtlety here. Hidden in amongst the book is the gift of bicultural, bilingual upbringing. There's a new way of looking at the world and telling us about it, a freshness to story here.
Shalini wrote a story about being an Indian Wonder Woman. She works as a comedian and a writer, and she wrote about when she was younger, she idolised Wonder Woman, and her grandmother, who was at home, gave her some hints and said, oh, you can be Wonder Woman, but you can be better. You can be Indian Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman wears a skimpy outfit, but you can wear long saree and you can flip people with it. And, you know, so she made up this Indian Wonder Woman.
No matter what the form, you'll find a brutal honesty just below the surface. The pressure to succeed, taken to extremes in Pauline Nguyen's extract.
There's a story by Pauline Nguyen. Now, Pauline owns a restaurant called the Red Lantern in Sydney. She wrote this passage that I thought, this has to be in the book. It's brutal, but it has to be. About, she used to come home from school with their school reports. So her and her brothers would line up in a row and their dad would look over their reports. And for every D they got 4 lashings with a bamboo cane. For every C, they got 3 lashings. For every B, they got 2 lashings. And while they were lying in a bloodied and weeping heap on the floor, for every A, he'd throw a $1 coin down. And I thought, what a terrible thing to happen in your high school years. So that's awful. And then I read the next line, which said, and this continued during our primary school. And I thought, whoa, wow, that's really brutal.
There is also the search for belonging. Is it in the land of their fathers and grandfathers? Or is it here, in the streets and lanes where they grew up? Perhaps it's both.
Kylie Kwong wrote a piece about going back to visit her ancestral homeland. Now, Kylie Kwong's family have been here for generations, many generations, since the 1800s. And so she went back to this little ancestral village in China with a purpose, that she was going to cook for them. She felt a sense of being at home, and the food seemed familiar. She felt a real connection.
One of the things we see across these stories is an inherent difference. And I'm wondering if that difference comes from the different structures of Asian languages.
It's still very hierarchical, the language. Sometimes hierarchy isn't necessarily a bad thing. Hierarchy is just, if it's done right, it's about respect, and you accord respect to certain people, your elders, for example. And that's the difference, is that when we go home, we are Chinese kids. Australians at a certain age will see their parents as their friends. If you're Chinese, generally, your parents are always your parents.